Good Wednesday morning, everyone, and welcome into today's daily Bible reading for January the 11th. Today we are reading together in Genesis chapter 15 and Genesis chapter 16. We're going to read in chapter 15 about the reaffirmation of the covenants between Yahweh and Abraham, or Abram, as he is still known at this time. And then we're going to see an unfortunate event where Abram and Sarai, well, they get a little anxious, a little impatient, and they actually try to circumvent, or I don't know if circumvent's the right word. They try to take matters into their own hands and bring about what they believe is the fulfillment of Yahweh's promise to Abraham concerning descendants. And let's just say that it does not go too well. So we're going to see that here in Genesis chapter 16. But first, let's read together in chapter 15. We'll read Genesis 15 and 16 together, and then come back and talk a little bit about what we see within these texts. After these events, Genesis 15, verse number 1, the word of Yahweh came to Abram in a vision. So this entire chapter 15, I believe, is happening in a single vision. Go a little bit deeper in a little while whenever he goes into, I think, a deeper vision. But all of this seems to be taking place within a vision from Yahweh to Abram here in chapter 15. And he says, "Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield. Your reward will be very great." But Abram said, "Yahweh God, what can you give me, since I am childless, and the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus?" Abram continued, "Look, you have given me no offspring, so a slave born in my house will be my heir. Now the word of Yahweh came to him, this one will not be your heir. Instead, one who comes from your own body will be your heir." He took him outside and said, "Look at the sky and count the stars. If you're able to count them," then he said to him, "your offspring will be that numerous." Or look at the sky and count the stars. If you're able to count them, your offspring will be that numerous. Abram believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness. He also said to him, "I am Yahweh, who brought you from Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to possess." But Abram said, "Yahweh God, how can I know that I will possess it?" He said to him, "Bring me a 3-year-old cow, a 3-year-old female goat, a 3-year-old ram, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon." So he brought it all these to him, cut them in half, and laid the pieces opposite each other. But he did not cut the birds in half. Birds of prey came down to the carcasses, but Abram drove them away. As the sun was setting, a deep sleep came over Abram, and suddenly great terror and darkness descended on him. Then Yahweh said to Abram, "Know this for certain, your offspring will be resident aliens for 400 years in a land that does not belong to them, and will be enslaved and oppressed. However, I will judge the nation they serve, and afterward they will go out with many possessions. But you will go to your ancestors in peace and be buried at a good old age. In the 4th generation they will return here, for the iniquity of the Amorites has not yet reached its full measure." When the sun had set and it was dark, a smoking fire pot and a flaming torch appeared and passed between the divided animals. On that day, Yahweh made a covenant with Abram, saying, "I give this land to your offspring, from the brook of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates River, the land of the Kenites, Kenizzites, Cadmonites, Hethites, Perizzites, Rephaim, Amorites, Canaanites, Girgashites, and Jebusites." Chapter 16 of Genesis, Abram's wife Sarai had not borne any children for him, but she owned an Egyptian slave named Hagar. Sarai said to Abram, "Since Yahweh has prevented me from bearing children, go to my slave. Perhaps through her I can build a family." And Abram agreed to what Sarai said. So Abram's wife Sarai took Hagar, her Egyptian slave, and gave her to her husband Abram as a wife for him. This happened after Abram had lived in the land of Canaan 10 years. He slept with Hagar, and she became pregnant. And when she saw that she was pregnant, her mistress became contemptible to her. So Sarai became contemptible to Hagar. Then Sarai said to Abram, "You are responsible for my suffering. I put my slave in your arms, And when she saw that she was pregnant, I became contemptible to her. May Yahweh judge between me and you. Abram replied to Sarai, Here, your slave is in your power. Do whatever you want with her. Then Sarai mistreated her so much that Hagar ran away from her. The angel of Yahweh found her by a spring in the wilderness, the spring on the way to Shur. He said, Hagar, slave of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going? She replied, I'm running away from my mistress Sarai. The angel of Yahweh said to her, Go back to your mistress and submit to her authority. The angel of Yahweh said to her, I will greatly multiply your offspring, and they will be too many to count. The angel of Yahweh said to her, You have conceived and will have a son. You will name him Ishmael, for Yahweh has heard your cry of affliction. This man will be like a wild donkey. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand will be against him. He will settle near all his relatives. So she named Yahweh, who spoke to her, You are El Roi. For she said, In this place have I actually seen the one who sees me. That is why the well is called Be'er Lahai Roi. It is between Kadesh and Bered. So Hagar gave birth to Abram's son, and Abram named his son, whom Hagar bore, Ishmael. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore Ishmael to him. And that is Genesis 15 and 16. Again, 15, looking at the reaffirmation of the covenant. Now, there's a couple different ways to read what's going on here in Genesis 15. The Lord comes to him in a vision and says, Don't be afraid, I'm your shield, your reward will be great. The way Abram responds could be taken in a couple different ways. It could be seen as hesitancy, and he's like, well, you say that, but I don't know exactly how that's going to happen since I have no offspring of myself, and the one who would legally be my heir is somebody named Eleazar of Damascus, who is a slave that was born in my house. You can read that way, or you could read it as this being a statement of faith from Abram, that he's saying, I believe you, but this is what the deal is at this point. Is this how it's going to happen? Is this one going to be the heir? Well, the word of Yahweh comes to him, because at this point, again, the heir is not a traditional heir. First, we thought it might be Lot, but it seems that Abram and Lot at this point have disconnected from one another. They've gone their separate ways. Eliezer at this point, again, is the slave going to be the heir? Well, Yahweh answers, says, no, it's not going to be Eliezer. It's actually going to be somebody that comes from your own body. And this is the first time that this bit of detail has been given so far in the story of Abram and his covenant with Yahweh. First time that has been said specifically that it is going to be somebody who actually comes from your body. It's going to be of your blood, not somebody you've adopted, but it's going to be actually of your blood. And he takes Abram outside and he says, look up at the stars. If you can count the stars, then you can count the number of offspring that you're going to have. This is the second way he's described it. The first way, back in chapter 13, he described his heirs as all the bits of dust in the world. If you count the dust, you count your offspring. If you count the stars, you count your offspring. The idea here being they're going to be just numerous, too many to be able to count. Verse 16 is a very famous verse because it's quoted later on in the letter that Paul wrote to the Romans. Abram believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness. God, Yahweh, credited this belief of Abram to him as righteousness. It was a sign of his righteousness. Now, believed can also be understood as trusted. Now, he trusted that Yahweh was true, that Yahweh was reliable. He trusted that Yahweh was trustworthy. And it shows as he goes throughout the process of fulfilling the covenant that he had with Yahweh. Although there were times of weakness, again, we're going to see that in the very next chapter. The very next chapter, I believe, is a mistake that Abram and Sarai made. But even at moments where Abram's faith might dwindle a little bit, God continues to show his faithfulness. But Abram here, he responds again. We could read this as hesitancy after verse number 8, verse number 7. I am the Lord, I am Yahweh, who brought you from the land of Ur. I believe that's a foreshadowing of the Exodus. Remember, he brought his people out of Egypt. He brought Abram out of Ur of the Chaldeans, and this is the land I'm going to give you to possess. So here's a promise again, but here's Abram's question. Lord God, Lord Yahweh. Actually, I don't need to check that out. I just now noticed that the capitals in that phrase is different. I need to go and look up and see what words are actually used there. He says, Lord God, how can I know that I will possess it again? Is this hesitancy on his part? Is he questioning God's ability to make this happen? Or is this just looking for confirmation? Is he just looking to learn more details here? Probably going to lean. I was leaning previously, and past times I've gone through this text, I lean more towards the hesitancy part. But now, as I read this again, you never see in these moments Yahweh. I never see him chastise Abram for these questions. He just gives some answers, or in the case of the land promise, now he's going to go through this covenant ceremony, this covenant ritual with Abram, because Yahweh tells him, go get 3-year-old cow, 3-year-old female goat, 3-year-old ram, a turtle dove, young pigeon, cut them in half, and then we'll figure out what we're going to do next. So he does that, cuts them in half, even has to shoo away some birds, and then a deep sleep comes over Abram. The same word there for deep sleep is the same word used for the deep sleep that Adam went into in Genesis chapter 2, which is something interesting there to think of. And then there was great terror and darkness descending upon him. I wonder if that is the feeling of his descendants being in captivity, because that's the next thing that is told to him. Your offspring will be resident aliens. They will be enslaved. They will be oppressed. And afterward, they will go out with many possessions. So even though they are aliens, even though they're enslaved, even though they're oppressed, I'm going to take care of them, because as they go out, as I judge the nation that enslaves and oppresses them, they will go out with many possessions, which that's what we're going to see in the Exodus. That's exactly what happens. But this is not going to happen with you, though. It's not going to happen with you. Obviously, because the 400 years that's mentioned previously, that you are going to go to your ancestors in peace and be buried at a good old age. It is in the 4th generation that they will return here, for the iniquity of the Amorites has not reached its full measure. The Amorites, I believe, signifying the whole of the Canaanites that are within the land. So after this takes place, when the sun had set and it was dark, a smoking fire pot and a flaming torch appear and pass between the divided animals. Many speculate that this is just a way of describing Yahweh himself passing between these animals in this covenant ceremony. It doesn't say that Abram does. It says that Yahweh does. And I believe that could be significant in the fact that it shows that no matter what, Yahweh is going to be faithful to his promise in this regard. As much as Abram might struggle sometimes with his faith, Yahweh does not. He is perfect in his commitment and his faithfulness to the covenant. And we are going to see that continually, even when mankind loses faith, even when mankind struggles in their faith, struggles with keeping the covenant, Yahweh never does. He says, I will give, or I give this land to your offspring. He made a covenant. I give this land to your offspring. It is going to happen. Yahweh has made this covenant. He has gone through this ritual. You can take it to the bank. That's chapter 15. Chapter 16, again, seems to be a little impatience here, maybe on the part of primarily, it seems, Sarai, Abram's wife. She had still not born any children to Abram, but she owned this Egyptian slave. I wonder if this is someone she got from Egypt. Remember, they had that little excursion down to Egypt. Wasn't really a good thing that happened down there, going there to begin with, and what happened down there. I wonder if this is somebody that she brought with her at this point. If it is, we're going to see that bad decision leading to this further bad decision. She says, it's the Lord, it's Yahweh who's prevented me from bearing children. I agree with that. Yeah, it's not time for it to happen yet. But she, again, seems to be impatient. Therefore, she says, if it's not going to happen for me right now, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you my slave, which belongs to me, and then I can build a family through her. That sounds like a recipe for disaster. And that's exactly what ensues. Abram's wife Sarai took Hagar, her Egyptian slave. I want you to note here the relationship. Abram's wife, I believe the language here is very, very purposeful. The wife took the slave. The wife gave the slave to her husband. as a wife for him. So there has been a promotion now of Hagar. Hagar has gone from being a slave to now being a wife. She's going from having no status to having all the status that Sarah has. She goes from being the underling, the inferior, to now being someone equal with Sarai. But not only does she become equal, but eventually she's going to be elevated above Sarai in her own eyes. Notice, I want to note here as well, again, we have the Eden echoes of the fall that Sarai took, gave, and Abram partook of. Same thing Eve did with Adam. She took the fruit, gave the fruit to Adam. Adam ate of it. Here, she took her slave, gave the slave to Abram. Abram went in with her, and she became pregnant. And again, this only causes problems because when she saw that she was pregnant, her mistress, Sarai, became contemptible in her eyes. Why? Well, because now the most important woman in this clan, in this family, is Hagar. Hagar has that which is most valuable within her womb. Hagar has the heir. And it would not be at all a stretch to believe that Hagar now sees herself as being more important than Sarai. She probably has a very boastful feeling towards Sarai. She probably looks down on Sarai and saying, hey, look at me. I'm able to give Abram something that you have never been able to give him. She looks down on Hagar, on Sarai. And Sarai recognizes this. Sarai says to Abram, you are responsible for my suffering. I mean, there's a little bit of lack of self-awareness here, I believe. She's very self-unaware because Sarah's the one that came to Abram in this instance. I put my slave in your arms. Yeah. And when she saw that she was pregnant, I became contemptible for her. May the Lord judge between me and you. May Yahweh judge between me and you. Well, I think there's a lot of blame to go around here altogether. But Abram doesn't do a very good job here, I don't believe, of taking responsibility, stepping up and leading in this situation. Instead, he says, hey, she's yours. You do what you do with her, what you want to do with her. And Sarah mistreated her. She abused her. She treated her horribly. So much so that Hagar runs away. You know what? Really, who can blame her, right? Who can blame her from running away from such mistreatment that Sarai was heaping upon her? Well, as she's running away, she finds herself by a spring in the wilderness, and it says the angel of Yahweh found her. Who is this angel of Yahweh? Some would say this is just a regular old angel that's coming with a special message. Others would say, let me see here, there's one more idea. Some would say that this is Yahweh himself. This is God the Father himself coming in some sort of manifestation. Or what I actually lean towards of who this angel is, I believe it to be the pre-incarnate form of Jesus. And this will be the Logos or the Logos. There is a very old belief in Judaism that that God had two forms. There were two gods, in a sense, in the heavenly realm. There was the non-formed Yahweh, the one that did not have a body, that just had a spiritual body, that type of existence in the heavenly realm. And then there was one who had more of a manifested body. He's seen on a number of occasions. This is the very first time that the angel of Yahweh is mentioned here in the Bible, and you're going to see him on a number of occasions as you go throughout the rest of the New Testament, or the rest of the Old Testament. But it's always someone who has a body and who comes down to earth and does things like what we see right here. That's probably where I'm leaning. Probably leaning toward this being the Logos, this being the Word, this being the pre-incarnate form of Jesus. But regardless of who the true identification is, there's some evidence that could point any of those three directions. The angel of Yahweh here finds Hagar, and speaks to her, kind of asks about what's going on. Obviously, he knows. And you might think, the angel of Yahweh here, after he hears the mistreatment, might say, oh, well, no, that's too bad. Hope things get better for you. And, best of luck. But instead, he tells her to go back. Go back to Sarai. Go back to suffer. Go back and fight through it. Because if you do, there's going to be something great for you. I will greatly multiply your offspring. There'll be too many to count. That is very Abrahamic in its nature. Just as the Lord said to Abram that your descendants will be too many to count. He says the exact same thing to Hagar. Of course, this is going to be the family of Ishmael who's going to come about. He even names the child's name will be Ishmael. Anytime again we see the L at the end of a word, the EL, that is something having to do with God. Beth El, meaning the house of God, the household of God. Here Ishmael, meaning God hears what's going on, because the Lord and Yahweh has heard your cry. Tells a little bit about what Ishmael's life is going to be, and we know there's a great conflict between the descendants of these two men, those coming from Abraham through Sarah, and then those from Abram and Hagar here. But Hagar here responds well. She named the one who spoke to her. She said, "You are El Roi," meaning God sees me. Again, the El there. And she's just astounded. Have I actually seen the God who sees me? That's incredible. Where she was, this spring where this well was, she calls Be'er Lahai Roi. Gives a little bit of a location stamp there between Kadesh and Bered. And she goes back. And as she goes back, she gives birth to that son. And the son's name, again, is Ishmael. Again, very making sure you understand who this son is. So Hagar gave birth to Abram's son. Abram named his son, whom Hagar bore. Don't get mistaken. This is the one through Hagar, Ishmael. And when this happened, Abram was 86 years old when he was born. So as we progress through the story again, we see a man of faith. He shows that faith in chapter 15, but very quickly we're reminded that he's still a man. He has shortcomings, and same thing for Sarai as well. She has her shortcomings. She has her difficulty understanding exactly how this is supposed to take place. Because again, if she's 86, Abram's 86, then she's 76. She's past the time of childbearing, and she's wondering how exactly is this going to happen. Maybe the way it's going to happen is through this slave of mine. And unfortunately, that shows just to be a terrible idea that's going to cause a number of problems and issues that happen within this family. Unfortunately, here they sowed to the winds and they reaped the whirlwind. They reaped a great deal of pain and grief here within this chapter of Genesis chapter 16. So what do we learn from these two chapters? Again, we see God's faithfulness, and then we see our weakness. It teaches us a little bit about ourselves, that the same pattern is true within our own lives, that God is always faithful. God is going to make sure that whatever he promises to us is going to come to fruition. Our job is really focus on ourselves, to really focus on making sure that we remain faithful to God in every way. We don't need to go about trying to circumvent God's plans. We need to allow his plans to play out as they're supposed to play out. Trust in him. Trust in his promises. Trust in his wisdom. Trust in his ability to provide for us in every way that he promises. Again, don't try to take matters into our own hands. That's only ever going to get us in trouble and cause a great deal of issue for us. So keep that in mind as we continue working our way through the story of Abraham, that there are some ups, there are some downs, but there's always lessons for us to learn. And I hope that you see that as we continue throughout this text. I appreciate so much you tuning into this reading on this Wednesday morning. We'll be back at it again tomorrow, reading in Genesis chapter 17, which is going to talk about the, let's see, are we just in 17 tomorrow? Yeah, we're just in 17. Let's see, what did I do? Oh, no, was I supposed to read only 16 today? Oh, man, I think I was. Welp, that's unfortunate. Maybe I did the schedule a little wrong this week. I think I might have a little bit. That's okay. We'll read 17 tomorrow. We'll figure out something that we can do to get back on schedule again. Sorry about that. I guess I read the schedule wrong. But nonetheless, we'll be back reading again tomorrow on Thursday. I hope that you have a great rest of your day, and we'll be looking forward to reading in the morning. Although today is Wednesday, which means we're going to have our midweek study tonight, actually being the second Wednesday of the month. We will be doing our song, scripture, and supplication service tonight. Very encouraging night. Hope that you'll be able to be there or tune in on our live stream if you're unable to get out. Hope that everyone will be really encouraged by our time spent together, worshiping God, praising his name through song, offering up prayers to him, and then reading from his word as well. Looks to be a great night. Hope we can see you then. Again, we'll be back at it again tomorrow. Thanks for tuning in. Have a great rest of your day. Take care, and God bless.